Hi there, my name is Caitlin Bandy and this is my channel Bandy's Books, and today I am here to talk to you about the Women's Prize. So I have been on booktube for a couple years now, and honestly prior to booktube I never really paid attention to book prizes too much. Occasionally I would see a book with a sticker that said it was nominated for the Booker Prize or the Women's Prize, things like that, but it wasn't like a driving force in what I was reading. But since joining booktube, I have been immersed in the world of literary prizes. I've seen so many channels covering so many different literary awards, and honestly I've learned about literary awards that I had no idea even existed prior to joining booktube. And over the last couple years, I've really started to get into some of the literary awards. I won't pretend that I'm a literary expert or that I pay attention to the awards in any sort of excruciating detail. I am but a humble chef. I don't have a degree in English or literature or anything like that. Sometimes I feel like these books go way over my head, so I just want to be straightforward with that and set the right expectations off the bat. So this year I will be trying to read all of the longlisted books for the Women's Prize, and then depending on how well I get the books, I may try to predict what the shortlist is and make a few videos about that as the prize progresses onwards. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into a little bit of information about the Women's Prize this year, and then let's talk about the books that have been longlisted. So the long list was announced this morning on March the 5th, and it consists of 16 books. The shortlist will be announced on the 24th of April, so that gives me just under 2 months to read 16 books. I think that that's pretty doable. And finally, the winner will be announced on the 13th of June. If you're not that familiar with the Women's Prize, here are the winners for the last 4 years. In 2023, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver was the winner. In 2022, The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki won. In 2021, Piranesi by Susanna Clark won. And in 2020, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell was the winner. So now that we have that out of the way, let's go into the 16 books that have been longlisted. I want to say right away before we dive into this that I was only familiar with a couple of the books on this list. Several of them were very new to me, but in watching several other reaction videos to the long list, I have also come to find out that I am not the only one that is not that familiar with this long list. First up, we have A Trace of Sun by Pam Williams. Rafe is left behind in Granada when his mother Scylla follows her husband to England in search of a better life. They are all strangers when they're reunited 7 years later, and the emotional impact leads to events that tears the family apart. So right off the bat, this is one of the books that I was unfamiliar with. I'm not super familiar with Pam Williams as an author. I hadn't heard of this book. It wasn't even on my radar. But that being said, this sounds like it is my cup of tea. I love books that are set in different places. I love books that explore the emotional impact of family. I love the idea of a kid coming to terms with his abandonment. This is one that I'm actually really excited about. I will most likely be reading this book in April because there were no copies available at my local library, on Libby, or anywhere that was easily accessible, so I had to ship myself a copy. Then I have Ordinary Human Failings by Megan Nolan, 1990 London. Tom Hargraves, a rising star in journalism, stumbles across a scoop, a dead child on a London estate, with suspicion painted on one reclusive family of Irish immigrants. In the center is Carmel, beautiful, broken, crushed by failure, and with no chance of escape. With the police closing in, she must confront the secrets and silences that have trapped her family. Lucky for me, this is a book that was available at my local library, so I placed a hold and should be able to get a hold of it in the next week or two. The mystery element of the story sounds really interesting. I love that we have this rising star in journalism that stumbles upon this case, and that we get this emotional exploration of this Irish family and the secrets that they've long buried. Then we have Hangman by Maya Binyam. A man returns home to sub-Saharan Africa after 26 years in America, but he realizes that he no longer recognizes his country. Thankfully, someone recognizes him, a man who calls him brother, setting him on a quest to find his real brother who's dying. This is one of the books that I was not that familiar with, but it sounds like it's right up my alley. I read a lot of African literature and I love that element of the story. I also love that we have this man that's coming home to a place he doesn't recognize after being far, far away. This is something we relate to in my household. My partner Oz grew up in the country of Angola, which is in the southern half of Africa, and he actually just flew home yesterday to go visit his family, and it'll be the first time that he's got to go home in, I think, about 9 years now. So I imagine that he's experiencing this very thing right now, the multitude of changes that have occurred while he's been away. I was able to get a copy of this from my local library, so I think this is probably going to be the first book that I read from the long list. After that, we have Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy. Soldier doesn't know who she is anymore. She's lost herself to motherhood. She barely sees her husband, who's taken to working late most nights. A chance encounter with a colleague feels like a lifeline to the person that she used to be. So this is a book that doesn't come out here in the States until I think the middle of June. So there is no easy access to this. And I know a lot of people around the world are frustrated about the Longlist picking books that are not readily available outside of the UK. I was nervous that I wasn't going to be able to find a copy to read because I am here in the States, and like I said, it doesn't publish until June, but I did manage to find a used copy and it is now on its way. So I should be getting this just in time for April reading. This book sounds really good, and I love that it explores motherhood and the impact that that has on women, how some women feel like they're losing their identity, and what postpartum struggles feel like. Then we have The Wren by Annie Enright. 22-year-old Nell, inspired by her grandfather, Irish poet Phil McDarragh, leaves her mother Carmel's home to find herself as a writer and live a life of her choosing. Carmel also knows the magic of her daddo's poetry, but when he abandons the family, Carmel struggles to reconcile the poet with the man who walked away from her, her sister, and her cancer-ridden mother. This is another book that was readily available, so I picked up a copy from my local library, and I'm really looking forward to diving into it. I love the idea of this family who has been abandoned by this man who is kind of a legend because he's this famed poet, and he's clearly left big shoes to fill. We have his granddaughter who is kind of trying to live up to his legend, and the rest of his family who's really struggling with him as a man, not him as the persona he presents to the world. Next up, we have The Maiden by Kate Foster. Edinburgh, October 1679. Lady Christian Nemo is charged with the murder of her lover, James Forrester. The headlines label her adulterous, whore, murderer. Why did Christian, a woman of privilege and respectability, risk it all? So this book is based on a true story, and I think it sounds really interesting. I love a good historical fiction with a mystery element, so I want to dive into this one really quickly. This is another book that I didn't have easy access to, so I had to order a used copy. I have one on the way and should get it just in time to start reading it in April. Then we have 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster by Mirinae Lee. In the DMZ that separates North and South Korea, an unforgettable woman known only as Trickster lives. This remarkable character and her family struggle to survive the most turbulent times of Korean history. This is another book that was based on a true story. It was inspired by this author's great aunt who became one of the oldest women to ever escape North Korea alone. It sounds fascinating, and I really can't wait to dive into it. Luckily, my local library has copies and I have placed it on hold. It should be available within the next 2 weeks. Then I have Nightbloom by Peace Adzo Medi. When Selassie and Akorfa were young girls in Ghana, they were not just cousins, they were inseparable. But then Selassie becomes hostile, building a wall around herself and shutting Akorfa out. Akorfa heads to America to attend medical school, but finds her path blocked by insidious racism. Only a crisis can cause Akorfa to return to Ghana and bring the two friends back together. This is perhaps the author that I am most familiar with on this long list. I have another book by Peace Adzo Medi on my bookshelves. And when Nightbloom came out, I remember putting it in like my new releases that I was most excited about. This sounds really good. And as I've mentioned previously, I read a lot of African fiction and I love emotional explorations. So I think this one is going to be right up my alley. Then I have In Defense of the Act by Effie Black. Jessica Miller is fascinated by the tendency of humans to end their own life, but secretly she believes that such acts might not be so bad after all. As she comes to terms with her own relationship and what it means to be queer, a single event throws everything she once believed into doubt. This is one of those books that I was completely unaware of, and I'm not sure what to think about it. It's interesting because the cover of it is very bright and cheerful, but the summary of it makes me think that this is going to be very emotional and deep. I love that this focuses on a topic of unaliving oneself, and I think this is a topic that should get discussed more frequently. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to wait a little bit to read it because there were no easily accessible copies, so I had to find a secondhand copy to ship to myself. After that, I have Western Lane by Chetna Maru. This is another book that I'm pretty familiar with because it was on the Booker Prize long list last year, and I saw quite a few reviews of it. It seems like it's a really hit or miss book. 11-year-old Gopi has been playing squash her whole life, but when her mother dies, her father takes her training regimen to brutal new levels. But on the court, she's not alone. She is in awe. So as I mentioned, this is one of those books that seems to be very polarizing. People either love it or hate it, and I'm not sure where I'm going to stand on this. I don't mind reading books about sports, and I actually think there could be a lot of poignant moments in a book about a girl dealing with grief by immersing herself in the world of a sport. That being said, I know absolutely nothing about squash. This is a book that is readily available, so I've already picked up a copy from my library. Then we have Restless, Dolly, Maunder by Kate Grenville. Dolly Maunder was born at the end of the 19th century, when society's locked doors were finally beginning to crack open for women. In a world of limits and obstacles, she is able, at a cost, to make a life that she can call her own and to open doors for the women who come after her. This is another book that is based on a true story, and as I mentioned, I really love historical fiction, so I'm looking forward to diving into this. This book does not release until the 28th of March here in the States, so I've placed my name on the waitlist at my local library, and I should be able to pick up a copy just as soon as the book releases. Then we have River East, River West by Abe Ray Lescure, Shanghai, 2007. 14-year-old Alva was raised by an American expat mom, and she had a Chinese dad who she never knew. When her mom announces an engagement to their Chinese landlord, Alva goes off to the American school in Shanghai, which is full of expats and the thrills of a city where foreigners can do whatever they please. 1985, Lu Feng, a young married man, is forced to confront difficult questions about himself as China opens its doors to the first wave of foreigners in decades. So I'm pretty excited to see this book pop up on this list. This is a book that came onto my radar in like the last 3 months of last year. I believe I predicted it for the Aardvark Book Club, and that's how I initially found out about it. But this sounds really interesting to me. I love that this was kind of described as like the anti-American immigration story. It's working in reverse, and I think that that's really cool and interesting. I am currently on hold for a copy of this, but I should have it within the next week to 2 weeks. Then we have Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan, Jafra, 1981. 10-year-old Sashi wants to become a doctor, but over the next decade, violent civil war tears through her home, derailing her dreams. Her 4 brothers and their friend are swept up in the violence. Invited to become a medic in a local field hospital, brutal atrocities cause Sashi to question where she stands. This was a book that I was not familiar with prior to the Longlist, and I'm really excited to have found it because it sounds like a book that's really interesting to me. I love the historical aspect of it. I love that this book starts with a young woman who aspires to be a doctor and help her community, and who must overcome like insurmountable obstacles to do so. And I love that there's this war aspect that's going to cause her to question who she is and if the goals that she set for herself really matter in the long run. I currently have a hold placed for this one at my local library, so I should get this probably at the beginning of April. Then we have Enter Ghost by Isabella Hammad. After years away from Palestine, actress Sonia returns to visit her sister Hanin. It's her first time back since the second Intifada and the death of her grandparents. When she meets Maryam, a local director, she's roped into a production of Hamnet that's to take place in the West Bank. As opening night draws near, it becomes clear how many violent obstacles stand in the way. This is a book that I am a little bit familiar with, but mostly because I watched a few Longlist prediction videos and I saw this book pop up a couple different times. I'm actually really glad to see this book on the list. I think with the current situation in Palestine, it is important to focus on some Palestinian literature. I also really like that this book is set in the theater, and I think that that makes this kind of a unique exploration. I'm really looking forward to diving into this one. Unfortunately, I'll have to wait just a little bit as it's on hold for the next 2 weeks. Then I have The Blue Beautiful World by Karen Lord. The world is changing and humanity must change with it. Rising seas and soaring temperatures have radically transformed Earth. Meanwhile, Earth is being observed from afar by other civilizations, and now they're ready to make contact. So luckily this book was readily available and I was able to score a copy of it from my local library, and I'm glad because I want to dive straight into this one. I love a good sci-fi, and I love it even more when sci-fi and literary fiction come together. This is so up my alley. I also feel like this might be really poignant because it looks like it's going to discuss kind of the physical destruction of the earth and what humans need to do to adapt and overcome. And finally, we have And Then She Fell by Alicia Elliott. On the surface, Alice is exactly where she thinks she should be. She has a new baby girl named Dawn, and Steve, her white academic husband, specializes in her own Mohawk culture. But in their posh Toronto home, Alicia feels like an imposter. As she writes a modern retelling of the Haudenosaunee creation story, she finds herself losing bits of time and hearing voices that she can't explain. Then her neighbor's passive-aggressive behavior morphs into something more terrifying. Alicia believes that something is very wrong and that the creation story she's writing is the key to her and her baby Dawn's survival. I'm really excited about this book. I love that this is going to cover aspects of Indigenous culture. I love that there are horror thriller elements. I think that this will definitely cover a lot of really relevant and timely themes and topics. And I think that this will be a really emotional exploration as well. I just placed a hold for this book and I should be getting it within the next week. And I'm really looking forward to diving into it. I love a good horror/thriller, and I think that this one could be a really good read. So those are the 16 books that are on the Women's Prize long list. I'm pretty excited with how varied it is. There's some horror, science fiction, a lot of literary fiction, historical fiction, just a whole mix of things going on. We have books that that are set in all sorts of different parts of the world. There are books in Africa, in Asia, in North America, in Australia, and in the Caribbean. And if I'm completely honest, there's only maybe 1 or 2 books that just really aren't calling to me that strongly, but I could totally be proven wrong and they could end up being my favorites. So I'm going to be diving into these books really soon, so watch out for review videos popping up over the next few weeks. So that's the end of the video. If you liked it, hit the thumbs up, comment down below and let me know, do you follow any literary prizes? Do you follow the Women's Prize in particular? What do you think of this long list? Were there any books that you've read, any books that you would like to read? Are you going to be following the prize this year, trying to read any of the long list? Tell me everything about the prizes. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button down below, as well as the notification bell, so that you never miss a video, and that way we can see each other again soon. Thanks so much for joining. Bye.